So today we're going to be talking about writing better superheroes. In this specific one, we're going to be talking about avoiding tropes that make your superheroes and villains look bad. Mainly superheroes, but we will be having a slight bit about villains, just because of the fact that you can't have a good superhero without a good villain. So, before we start, I just want to mention that today's lesson is going to be posted an hour before we have our Adult Writers Club. So as a result, please, if you can make it, I would love it if you could make it to Writers Club. We have the Adult Writers Club in Meeting Room 1 upstairs in the American Fork Library. I would love to see all of your faces. I would love to get to know you better, and I would absolutely be honored to help edit any work that you have. So if you're watching this video when it comes out at 7, then please try to make it from 8 to 9 to the meeting tonight, which will be May 25th to 2023, just to clarify. Alright, now let's get started with the lesson. So the first thing that a lot of people talked about online as readers being something that bothered them is villains with no purpose other than to just be evil. They're totally flat, and or their motives make absolutely no sense. For example, they want to take over the world because of the fact that they believe their abusive mother instilled in them a desire to own everything. Unless you dive deeper into this backstory and explain why that makes sense, this doesn't make sense. You want to make sure that your villain's motives make sense and that they have a purpose for their villainy. For example, Loki, he felt like he was completely and utterly wronged by his family. Yes, he was adopted, but that was no excuse. He still felt like he was wiser and more intelligent and deserved to rule. This desire and feeling that he deserved to rule and wanting to prove himself is what caused all of the issues in the first movie with Thor. However, if he just said, I feel that I deserve to rule, but there was no reason, they made him ruler of the planet, and he's like, well, that doesn't matter, I still want to rule Earth too. I mean, I guess he could just be greedy, but as readers prefer motives that are deeper than just, I am greedy, I am selfish, I am a narcissist, fill in the blank. Generally, we like our villains to have depth, to have reasoning. Or if they have no reasoning, like they're a serial killer, then explain that. Explain that there is no reason, they just enjoy it, or they just feel a rush when they do it, or whatever random explanation you want to give that makes no sense to us because we're not serial killers, but to them it makes sense. That's okay, but that's different. That's a different category. Alright, the next one that we want to talk about is always killing the mentor. This was actually one that popped up about a dozen times when I was doing my research on what readers disliked. This trope is actually one of the most disliked tropes. And I think the reason why is because it's happened so often, it's kind of become the damsel in distress trope, where it was good for a while, and then it just got really old and annoying. And this is the same way. There are lots of ways to get rid of the mentor that isn't just killing them off. For example, you could have the mentor retire. You could have the mentor move on to another job. You could have the mentor decide that, this just isn't for them, and even though they did a good job, they want to do something else with their life. There are ultimately loads of ways that you can get the mentor to leave the scene without dying. Alright, the next one that I want to mention, and this is actually the one that was at the top of my list, but it was at the third most on other people's list, so it's still high up there on the dislike scale, but it's honestly my pet peeve, personally, and a lot of people agreed with me, but it was still below villains with no purpose in killing the mentor. Superpowers that are gained super easily with little explanation or no explanation, and then after procuring said superpowers, they have little to no weaknesses and are able to master said superpowers with little to no practice. This is really obnoxious. Why? Because of the fact that if it takes 10 minutes to master a superpower, what's the point? No one takes 10 minutes to master anything. If it took me 10 minutes to master chemistry, I'd be a freaking genius. But it doesn't take me 10 minutes to master chemistry. And just like that, your superhero powers should be just as complex. It should take months, if not years, if not decades to master fully. There's no way that they should just be able to, poof, I'm the best. No, absolutely not. And it bugs readers to have that because we want to see those characters try and fail, because we as humans have to try and fail. And so if you are saying, hey, they're an ordinary human who just got superpowers, well, you're not proving that to me. Prove to me that they're an ordinary human by having them practice and slave and labor and have blood, sweat, and tears to master that superpower, to master how to be stronger and how to conquer the weaknesses of the superpower. The superpower should have weaknesses, and it should not be gained super easily. And if it is, it has to have a very intense explanation. It cannot have just a passing comment or no explanation. You have to explain how and where and when and why they got those superpowers. You have to answer all the W's. Otherwise, your readers are just going to be like, kind of boring. As a result of that, they also have another trope that's kind of related to this, but in a flip-flop because it's villains. With villains, don't force the villain to have a relationship to the protagonist beforehand. Now, I know this can be good because, oh no, betrayal. But the problem with the oh no, betrayal is that it's often written poorly because it's forced. They're like, haha, I will make them hate this and I will make them feel betrayed. But you're trying so hard to make them that it's not actually writing a good story. They don't have to be related to the protagonist. They don't have to know the protagonist beforehand. They might not know each other until after they're trying to defeat each other. And that is okay. And actually, that's sometimes even better. With forcing the villain to have a relationship to your protagonist, the reason why it relates to the superhero one is because of the fact that there's this try-fail cycle. There's this real relationship. If you're forcing a relationship with the villain, you can tell and you can feel as a reader that it is forced and it feels wrong. And you're just annoyed the whole time, and then when it turns out they're the villain, instead of being like, oh no, I feel betrayed, you're like, well, of course they're the villain. They're so freaking obnoxious, and it felt so forced. Why were they even friends in the first place? You want it to feel natural. You want it to feel human. And if you want the relationship to feel natural and feel human, then you need to make sure you don't force them into a relationship with the villain. That being said, let's discuss another aspect about the villain that a lot of people don't talk about. Villains shouldn't always lose. Superheroes aren't perfect, like we were just saying. Villains aren't always perfect. But that doesn't mean that the villain shouldn't win sometimes. It's actually more compelling to read a superhero story when the villain wins and the hero has to try and move past that terrible feeling of failure and move forward. That honestly, superheroes who move past the feeling of failure and move forward and decide to keep fighting even though they failed, that helps me feel so much better. Having the villain win and feel like all is lost and persevere in spite of it, that is real. And that is what I love about it. Sure, I don't want the villain to win. It's the fighting through it that is so good and that makes it so deep and so rich. So, don't be afraid to have your villain win sometimes. That being said, with having the villain win sometimes, if the villain kills someone off in said winning process, they should have a solid reason behind it. It can't be flimsy. The reason why the whole Lois Lane gets kidnapped all the time thing is so freaking annoying to us now, and we're like, geez, she just gets kidnapped all the freaking time, is because of the fact that the villain doesn't really have a reason other than just spiting Superman and trying to annoy him and lure him into a trap. And I mean, I guess that's a reason, but it's not a very good reason. The villain should try to just do his own thing. Honestly, why bother Superman? Just go do your own thing, and if Superman happens to show up, Oh no. But why poke the bear? The villain, if they kill someone off, should have a solid reason. And it shouldn't be flimsy. It shouldn't be, oh, killed them off because they believe that their identity should remain a secret, and so they have to kill everyone that this superhero loves that figured out that they know they were a superhero. No. If the villain, why would they help the hero? First of all. But second, why would they even care about the superhero's identity being known? Wouldn't they want the superhero's identity to be known? That doesn't make sense. So that's just an example of something that doesn't make sense, has no solid reason behind it. It doesn't feel right as a reader. So your villain should do things that feel right to the reader. All right, they should have a reason to kill off characters, in other words. Sorry, wanted to finish that up. All right, next one is the hero absolutely refuses to kill a villain even if they are completely irredeemable and have slaughtered thousands of people. Now, we're talking about superheroes, right? So morality is good. Absolutely. I'm not saying to get rid of morality. Absolutely not. But there's a fine balance between a hero who is flawless in their morality and says everyone's redeemable, including psycho serial killers, and someone who kills every bad guy that they come across, believing that no one's redeemable. And this kind of leads on to our next point, where I mentioned the opposite is also bad. They kill, maim, injure, destroy, torture, all in the name of the greater good. That's more of a villain than that's more of a villain. Anti-hero at very best, but anti-heroes are tricky because anti-heroes are honestly really tricky to write because of the fact that there's that fine line between villain and morally gray superhero. So, with that being said, my 2 points are, don't make them so morally good that they refuse to kill a serial killer. No one would do that. If there was genuinely a serial killer, the hero would want them dead for the sake of humanity. Or at very least in prison, or if they've escaped from prison, let's say like the Joker, several times, and yet for some reason Batman refuses to kill him despite the fact that he has put thousands of lives in danger and killed dozens of people and escapes prison every single time. I think if he keeps escaping prison ain't gonna hold him. Should probably kill him. Whereas the opposite, where they torture people, they kill people, they maim people, they destroy the whole city, all in the name of catching the bad guy, who's supposedly worse than them, that's ultimately not a hero either. Anti-hero is tricky, so I will say if you're doing an anti-hero, do a lot more research into what's good and bad about anti-heroes, because they are honestly one of the toughest heroes to properly write. Alright, my last points. With villains, motivations such as world domination, amassing great wealth, and doomsday machines are pretty worn out. They're like the damsel in distress trope or the killing the mentor trope that we talked about earlier. Every villain since the 90s has wanted to dominate the world, amass great wealth, or build a doomsday machine. At this point, we're bored. We want our villains to have a better motivation. And if it is world domination, at least make it make sense. Like with Loki, he was promised that they would have equal opportunity for the crown, and then he realized he never had a chance. Now that makes more sense for world domination, but if they just want world domination because they want world domination, that's not proper motivation. So I would say any of these, like amassing great wealth or world domination or doomsday machines, are absolutely appropriate motivations. However, the problem was back then, when they had these things, there was no motivation. They just wanted to because they were evil. That doesn't work anymore. Readers are holding the authors to a higher standard. And this higher standard dictates that we require the motivations to have a better purpose behind it in the villain's mind. So, if you have a purpose for these, great. Otherwise, find a new motivation. And the last point that I'm going to mention is the final battle Superheroes, we don't just admire them for their brawn, we also want to admire them for their brains. We want them to be strategic. We want them to be clever. We want them to suddenly have an epiphany about the fact that nitrogen is the one weakness of this one thing, and therefore the superhero can't live without it, or something. The supervillain can't live without it, or something like that. We want those moments for the superhero. However, too often, superheroes, because of the fact that people love fight scenes, and don't get me wrong, I love a good fight scene, but we don't want superheroes who just strictly smack the villain into their own demise. We don't want someone just punching and wailing on them until finally they give up. We want heroes who are clever as well as strong. As a result, it's better to have them have a great fight, yes, absolutely, but have them in the middle of the fight try to be strategic. Have them in the middle of the fight try to solve the supervillain's weakness. That makes the fight have far more complexity and makes the reader far more interested than if they're just wailing on each other. Alright, thank you so much for listening. I hope that you'll join me later from 8 to 9 tonight, May 25th on Thursday. And thank you so much for listening. Let me know in the comments if you have any ideas for other lessons that you'd like me to do, or if you have any comments on these opinions. Again, I researched these opinions. So these are primarily reader opinions that have been given over years and years and years through polls and other methods. So I don't agree with all of these, but I do agree with all of these, but I agree with them to varying degrees. All right, have a great night.